back in the 90s, there is this company that is called Ripple Communications. So when you start to draw the connections between the three founders of the XRP ledger, considering they were early Bitcoin developers, and then we have the genesis block of the XRP ledger, so the blocks 0 to 3240 are all missing. I think it was really an attempt to hide, to really delete the connections between the early Bitcoin developers and the XRP ledger.
So welcome to the show, everyone. Today we are blessed to have no other than Edo Farina on, an inspiration to me, an inspiration to many, probably the leading influencer on X, formerly Twitter. I follow his show on YouTube as well, and just putting out really, really important information. There's not too much price hype around his content and the work they do. It's very deep macroeconomic infiltration, really, really good substance to it. And if you haven't heard of him, I strongly urge you all to go follow him on X. I think that's your main place of regular posting, if I'm not incorrect there, and definitely across YouTube as well and TikTok. So welcome to the show, Edo. It is an absolute pleasure. And I look forward to chatting with you this evening for me, this morning for you.
Yeah, pleasure to be here. I have been watching some of your content as well, especially on Instagram, have been doing a great work. So I'm very excited to be here. I think we have a lot to talk.
Beautiful. So I thought I'd kick things off a little bit different to what you're probably used to. And I personally, and I'm sure a lot of the people that follow me, would love to know the genesis story of Edo before crypto and what ushered you into the space, and obviously ultimately leading you down the path to the treasured asset that we hold dear, XRP.
For 1 second, I thought you were going to ask me about the genesis blocks of the XRP ledger, which that was a difficult question actually, but so I started in crypto back in 2017. I used it to do an internship in Portugal. I live in Greece and I am from Italy, so it's a pretty international background, but I was doing my internship there at a law firm. So I graduated in law, was studying in Portugal, in Lisbon, and I ended up buying, I was just a teenager. I was doing the university and I bought a car. So it was a Land Rover Freelander, very old model. And that car was very big. We used that car with my friends for some trips. We go to Spain. But I had a very hard time to park that car, and I was receiving multiple fines. Portugal is very difficult. It's not like Australia or the US. In Europe, sometimes in the capitals, if you live right in the city center, it can be challenging to park. So I used to work at this law firm, and I remember the senior partner always told me that I should get in crypto, and by the talks I should get some Bitcoin. So he was a very intelligent man. I still work to him to nowadays. He has a law firm and mostly focused on taxation on crypto.
When was this? What year was this one in?
Sorry?
What year was this?
What? Sorry, what?
What year? What 20?
What year? Yeah, sorry. That was in 2017.
Okay.
Yeah, I was around 18 or 19 years old by the time. So it was my first car and my first internship at the law firm. Since I was studying law, I got that chance to work with them, and I ended up selling my car. And I sold my car and I bought Bitcoin, I bought Dogecoin, and I bought Pac coin. So I bought the 3 coins. Doge and Pac, I ended up losing it all because there was this exchange called Cryptopia that's bankrupted. So that also taught me a hard lesson in crypto. But I used to say I went to the crypto university as well. And Bitcoin, actually, I kept it and I did quite great profits on that, and that was the beginning of my journey. And later on, of course, I ended up selling my BTC. I don't hold any Bitcoin anymore, and we can discuss that on a second moment. However, that's how I got started. It was because of Marcio, and if he will watch this podcast, I salute him.
Nice. And I guess that's a good little segue into what was there a particular moment in that early stage journey where you realized that XRP was, I guess, what was the moment when you realized it was the chosen one? Was
Well,
there a specific thing, or?
the first thing is that I used it to move the BTC across the exchanges. So I was just a beginner, and in the beginning I didn't have a cold wallet, so I was actively trading as well. Some day trades. My first day trades, it was not a big deal, just buying and selling like $600 and things like that. And I remember that moving that BTC across the exchanges, that would take me a lot of fees. And I was feeling like I was being taxed in my own money. And I didn't know back then if it was normal with crypto. And I remember doing some research. I think it was on Reddit or some online forum that I came across XRP as a means to send your BTC. In other words, you could buy the XRP. You could sell the BTC for XRP, send the XRP to the other exchange, and there you could convert the XRPs back to BTC. So basically, I was using XRP as a bridge currency, but barely I know that XRP was the chosen currency. So yes, it was very useful to use XRP, but it didn't click on my mind yet in 2017 or 18. I was just using it as a bridge currency. But later on, when I really like something inside myself really clicked, I would argue that it was when they dropped both times. So when they dropped the SEC lawsuit against Ripple, that was when I bought my largest sums of XRP, and that was when I really understood there is a reason why they are actually coming with this specific lawsuit against Ripple. And I just had the intuition back there that this was something bigger than what we were being told. And indeed, if we look back 3-4 years later, that's exactly how it has happened. And also during the 2020 and 19, and I don't know if I can say that words here, you can cut that off in case. But in the pandemic, when there was,
it's fine now. Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah, you can cut this if I say something about it that shouldn't be there. But when I understood they are trying, so let me rephrase it. I think when you edit, you can cut it. So we're gonna just rephrase it. So back in 2019, when there was the pandemic, I have understood that they were trying to get rid of cash. So they were moving us towards a cashless society. And that's when I understood that cryptocurrencies would play a pivotal role on this transformation, and XRP was the main one.
Yeah, interesting. And what do you think? Ultimately, this is a little question I had later on, but I think this is a good time to insert it. Do you hold hope that there could be a pathway to having this system set up benevolently, or do you think that it's going to be purely malevolent, so for evil purposes, as you just touched on there? Because ultimately there are some elements that are, there's a whole democratization of finance and, banking in itself, and there's a lot of liberation aspects to it. But I've always wondered, me particular, what you guys think behind closed doors on a percentage scale. Like, where do you look at it? Is there any hope at all, or is it always just going to be evil?
Well, that's a great question, and I have asked myself a lot of questions across this journey. I think it depends on which side of the story you're gonna be, and I think it really comes down to the understanding and to the decision you have to make if you want to be an early adopter of a technology or you're gonna be an early investor. So you have either to be a late adopter or an early investor. And what I mean by that is that all this fallacy that Bitcoin was a means of liberation, well, I totally disagree with that. I think Bitcoin was the first product of a government plan to digitalize the economy so they can gain control over every single transaction in the world. So Bitcoin was an instrument. So think about this as gets the most brilliant minds on this planet to develop a currency, a beta test coin, as I call it, and leave it to roll for 10 or 15 years. And in the meanwhile, you work on the final product, but you sell it to the public as if that's the final instrument for freedom, when in the other hand is actually the opposite, right? So if you really think about what a public blockchain is basically a sophisticated database that stores information. In this case, is storing every single transaction that we do. And that's exactly what happens with Bitcoin, for example. That's what happened with the XRP ledger as well. So unfortunately, I think the end goal it's really about central bank digital currencies, CBDCs. But in the other hand, if we have the opportunity to be early investors, we can somehow benefit from this transformation and prepare ourselves accordingly. So, for example, if you own XRP and you have your XRPs in a cold wallet, I think that's a very safe way to get on this transformation, because nobody can freeze your funds, nobody can do anything to you, and basically you can somehow become your own banking system. You can run a parallel economy. But if you're gonna use the layer 2 assets built on top of the XRP ledger, and by that I mean stable coins, for example, or any asset that is issued on top of the XRP ledger. And my coffee just arrived. Just let me open the door.
Go
here.
for it, mate.
Just got some
Beautiful.
cappuccino.
Lovely.
So let me come back to what I was saying. So we have to realize that the XRP ledger is a public, permissionless blockchain. In other words, anyone can build on top of the ledger, but anyone can also set their own rules when they are issuing assets there. So, for example, when we're talking about XRP, there is no clawback feature about the XRP itself. It also doesn't have any function where you can freeze the XRPs on chain. So to say that you have your XRPs in cold wallets is the same to say your assets are under safety, versus if you are using the stable coins, or if you are using assets that are issued on top of the XRP ledger, if there is a government order, they can just seize your stable coins. And that's, I think, the ultimate goal is for everyone to be using stable coins, which is just another name for CBDC. They can rebrand it. It's like selling you grape juice, but with alcohol, and they don't call it wine. They tell you it's grape juice with alcohol. So that's basically what they are doing with the stable coins. They are just rebranding it because most people were already aware for what it means to have a CBDC, and that's what they are doing in the United States, where Donald Trump, in theory, he has signed an executive order to actually ban the CBDCs, but in the other hand, he's working behind the scenes to make sure that CBDCs are going to be fully implemented. So that's coming for the entire planet. But in the other words, if you study how the elites operate, how the people, we can call them the rulers, we also should understand that they always give everyone a choice. They're not, if you really think about it, they never forcing anyone to do anything. So people are actually taking their own decisions. I recognize they are making it a bit harder, but going a bit out of crypto and about going beyond just the technical aspect, we always have a choice. And I think that's the beauty of it, because I call crypto the greatest transfer of wealth that has ever happened in this planet. But we want to be sure that we are on the right side of the history, right? We don't want to be the ones giving our wealth away to the market manipulators or to the people who are in control. We want to be on the right story of the history.
Yeah, great answer. Great answer. I'd like to just backtrack a little bit before we go into some specific questions, because one of my favorite, some would say conspiracies, but I'd say it's just a really great history story you give, and I'd love my followers to hear it, is the piece around the genesis of Bitcoin, the NSA links, you did a post yesterday on the fact that BTC was referenced in a video game, and you've got the XRP on the old computer in that movie that I've seen you posted a couple of times. I can't remember the name of the movie though. I'd just love to get. Yeah. What was it?
The Sneakers, I think, is the name of the movie.
The Sneakers, yeah, that's the one. I'd love just a little overview of your beliefs around how it actually propagated in the first place, because I think it's a fascinating story, and I just want to get those wheels turning for the listeners.
Yeah, that's a lovely story. And by the way, I dedicated many hours of my life into that research. Sometimes I couldn't sleep at night. And while I was having these discoveries, I was sometimes having like chills in my body. I was saying, I think sometimes when you ask something to God, God just reveals to you, right? So I got in firsthand a lot of these discoveries, and I can start by saying that I can really say that XRP is just Bitcoin 2.0. That's my final understanding of the situation. But how everything started, so we have David Schwartz, Arthur Brito, and Jed McCaleb, which are the three architects of the XRP ledger. And if we look for their background, David is an early Bitcoin developer. He never has hidden it. So you have public information of him on the earliest days in the forums of Bitcoin. And then you have Jed McCaleb, which he left from Ripple to build Stellar, but he had also connections with Vast, which is connected to Elon Musk, and it's all connected to the PayPal mafia. So we can trace a lot of connections between Jed McCaleb. Jed McCaleb is one of the most brilliant minds on the crypto space, and he for sure is one of the Satoshis. Satoshis is not a person; it's basically an organization. You have a group of people, and they were working on this project for over a decade or so. So it's not something that you come out with the beta test coin, which is the BTC, and in just a couple of months you carry on with the plan. That's for me, that's a multi-generational plan. And the most qualified people back there, you can be sure that Jed McCaleb is one of them. Jed McCaleb was also involved on Empty Gox. Not sure if you heard about that trading boots that has artificially created a bull run out of thin air. So he's also one of the founders of the Empty Gox. Then we have Arthur Brito, which we live in the internet age and nobody has seen his face. Well, I do have a picture of him, but he has decided to stay anonymous. So when you start to draw the connections between the three founders of the XRP ledger, considering they were early Bitcoin developers, and then we have the genesis block of the XRP ledger, so the blocks 0 to 3240 are all missing. I think it was really an attempt to hide the connections between the early Bitcoin developers, the 4 or 3 Satoshis. That's debatable. I think they are 3, but some people say they are 4. For me, it's Jed McCaleb, Arthur Brito, and David Schwartz. Perhaps there is one more. And I think it was an attempt to really delete the connections between the early Bitcoin developers and the XRP ledger. And I'm not sure if you have watched, but I have shared in my channels as well. There is an interview of an agent of the Homeland Security Agency, and when she was asked about Satoshi Nakamoto, she has openly said that the Homeland Security Agency has met with the Satoshis. So you have a government agent from the United States who has publicly recognized that the US indeed sat down with Satoshi Nakamoto to discuss the details about Bitcoin. And going further, we can go back in history all the way to, well, we can go so much years behind, but so let's start from the 90s. Back in the 90s, there is this company that is called Ripple Communications. So Ripple, as we know, was incorporated in something about 2013. Ripple as we know today. But before Ripple, so Ripple was also rebranded. Ripple became OpenCoin, that became Newcoin, that later on became Ripple as we know today, and Ripple Labs, which is the final version. But before the original Ripple, we had a company that was called Ripple Communications, and Ripple Communications was incorporated in 1991. And when we start to look for the employees of Ripple Communication and who was behind that, it was basically the INSA, which is a government agency. So what the governments often do, they misguise themselves as a private company so they can achieve goals without having uh, to be judged by the public, let's say, so they can escape the consequences. So what a better way to implement CBDCs or to create a plan for digital money if you are holding behind a private company. They often do that with
like Palantir, like what
yeah.
Palantir does
They often
exactly.
do
Yeah,
that also in the countries with telecommunication companies. So they give the illusion that you have a choice, that there is competition in the markets, but honestly, they are all owned. It's just an extension of the government. So that's what they do, for example, here in Europe, where you have Vodafone or you have other service providers, but they are all owned by the same. So that's how Ripple started. Ripple was essentially, and I have proof of that. I have made several threads on my X where I provide with the links, and anyone interested, I can even send you the thread afterwards. They can verify that Ripple Communications ended up being the same Ripple as we know today. So it's to say that before the white paper of Satoshi Nakamoto came out, we had Ripple over 10 years before the white paper. And that starts to explain some of the things they have displayed for the public eye. You know how they do with the masses. They actually have this technique where they want to achieve something, so it's predictive programming. So that's why you have in 1991 you have Ripple Communications Incorporated. In 1992 you have XRP in a movie. Is that in the movie Snickers, where there is a plot to end the Federal Reserve, and you can read XRP there in the movie. And then you have, I think in 1993, you have Bitcoin in a video game. And by the way, it comes a lot of coincidences because Arthur Britto was also a video game developer. So you just start to make these insane connections. And if we go even beyond that, we have Ryan Fugger, which is the original founder of Ripple. He is the first person to actually create. Ripple was known as a protocol for payments. It was not like a blockchain as the XRP ledger. But when you start to investigate Ryan Fugger, that's when things get extremely interesting, because the Fugger family was a family of bankers, essentially, that ruled the European economy in the 1500s. So the Fuggers came all the way to a long line of bankers that end up creating Ripple as we know today. If you really make the connections, you can trace now. It's called Jacob Fugger, was known to be the richest man alive. So back in the 18 in the Roman Empire time, we can call them that they were like the Rothschilds of what we know today. So they were the equivalent in terms of influence. And then you have Ryan Fugger that by coincidence, let's say, creates Ripple, and that Ripple becomes Ripple as we know today. And of course, they somehow placed Ryan Fugger on the sidelines, so I think people cannot uh, get the connections.
makes sense.
It's a deep rabbit hole because we can see that from so many angles. We can see from the Fuggers, or we can see from Ripple Communications, or we can see
Mm,
from all the connections between the XRP ledger architects and Bitcoin. We can see from the side that XRP fixes one by one every single one of Bitcoin flaws as well. You just start to put so many puzzles together, and it becomes virtually impossible that the outcome is not going to be CBDCs.
Thanks for that overview. Love it. That's going to be super engaging for them to listen to. The next one, I wanted to go into some specific questions. This one, I put out a Q&A thing with the followers yesterday, and we got heaps of questions. And the one that has by far and wide been the most frequent question, I've done a couple videos on it myself, but I think they want more information and they want to hear your take, is on the difference between the public and private ledger, and what do you anticipate happens once we get through regulations and we start to see the system rolled out. A lot of the followers are always asking me, oh, what's the difference? Why would they just shift from private to public when, they can just keep it off the books? So I'd love to hear your take on that. I know the followers would too. So give us your rundown.
I'll try to break it down as simple as possible. And this is quite controversial for me because I don't see that much mystery behind the public and the private ledger. So the private ledger is just essentially a version of the ledger that doesn't make the transactions public. So think about it as institutional clients, for example, they don't want their data to be released on public. So that's essentially the reason why they decided to create a private version of the XRP ledger that works with the same functionalities. It just has better energy consumption. But the fact is that a lot of people also think they will not use XRP on the private ledger. So I came out with a letter that I found from the government of Thailand. Actually, it's a letter from Ripple towards the government of Thailand, which was meant to be a private letter that I ended up getting access. I can share with you later. And in this letter, Ripple is essentially explaining some of the reasons why there's a private ledger, but most importantly, they are actually recommending that the government of Thailand utilizes XRP on the private ledger. So I don't think a lot of XRP holders sometimes are concerned about the private ledger because they might think it's a way to not use XRP. That's quite the opposite. They will essentially use XRP on the private ledger. They might use that as a test net as well. I don't really have any confidential information about if they have been conducting tests on the private ledger, but I don't really think there will be a difference on the price. For example, there's a lot of people who says the price on the private ledger is X. Well, I don't think that's because that would open a lot of arbitrage opportunities. That is just something that feels unreal for me. I just really think it comes down to privacy of institutional customers of Ripple. That's the main reason why there's a private ledger.
So their follow-up question would be, how does that then affect price if institutional usage of the coin, which is obviously one of the main drivers of price in the future, utility, if big chunks of the utility are hidden behind the veil of private ledger, how does that then look for the public perceived price?
I don't think the question should be how is that going to affect the price, because there are so many ways we have to look for the price. We have to look for a lot of the factors that are going to move the price is going to go beyond just institutions sending money across the globe or private customers of Ripple that simply want to hide their information, but we should be looking for the public data that's going to be tokenized. So, for example, if you're going to have the derivatives markets tokenized on a blockchain like the XRP ledger, well, that's all public information. You don't really need to go on you can't go on the private ledger for most of the data that's going to be tokenized. So I think that answers the question.
Yeah, then that's my answer as well.
Yeah,
but I just wanted it to come out of your mouth.
That's a fair question. Honestly, for all the years that I research, and it's a lot of time, I never found that much mystery on the private ledger. I think it's
those, they see those videos of Vasan with the seeing it go to 300,000, and this context is everything, and I think people just get lost in the minutiae a little bit.
I had conversation with Versan about this, and he has in the course of the years kind of changed his perspective from the private ledger. If you watch some of the most recent podcasts we had It's mainly about really hiding data from some players that don't want their data to be exposed. I think that's what it comes down, and I don't really think it's a threat for XRP's price appreciation or anything like that. Just
Yeah.
my take. I'm not saying I am 100% correct. I'm just saying that through the years, I never came across something that really caught my attention on the private ledger, especially with these private communications between Ripple and multiple governments. I have the letter from the government of Thailand.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, ultimately, there's $400 trillion sitting in like a liquidity reservoir ready to burst. That's the way I look at it. You know, and even
Yeah,
if you capture a fraction of that to be tokenized, yeah, stocks, bonds, derivatives, real estate, commodities, everything, it's like
yeah,
that's
because
all
in
public,
the end
ready
of
to
the
go.
day, in the end of the day, you can go beyond just cross-border payments. People think about XRP, they think only about payments, but right now it's just everything that you mentioned. Everything's being tokenized. We tokenize the derivatives market is just $1.2 quadrillion per year, just capturing a fraction of that, and the private ledger becomes irrelevant.
Absolutely.
And
And
another and sorry, to look things from another angle, if XRP is being used on the private ledger as Ripple has been advocating for central banks, that also drives scarcity for XRP. Doesn't mean because it's on the private ledger, but the fact that you only have 100 billion XRP, sorry, 99 billion XRPs that will ever exist, considering the ones that have been lost and burned. So it's really, even the private ledger can drive scarcity itself.
good point. And another one, popular question, the last of the follower questions, is with transactions and everything moving towards seconds and cents in the next few years, and you know the narrative just shifting day by day now, with Larry Fink coming out with that news today again, just reaffirming where we're heading, which we just talked about, tokenized world, and how keen he is for all the regulations to pass, the market structure stuff. One of the questions I get a lot is, well, if things move to seconds and cents, and one of the main revenue drivers for institutions for eons has always been leaning on fees between intermediaries and merchants, et cetera, et cetera. How do institutions compensate for one of their largest, or one of their large revenue drivers vanishing?
You mean essentially by unlocking all the capital that, let's say, is in Vostro accounts, and perhaps getting rid of Swift system, or just revolutionizing Swift? You mean how they gonna compensate for that?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I'm keen to hear your answer. I've given my 2 cents in the past, but I'd love to hear what your take on it all is.
Well, first, that's a great question. I have never really sat down and asked that question. Perhaps we can do that together on this occasion. So that can cause a collapse in the system somehow. I think that ultimately can lead to bank failures. I think we can have small banks getting wiped out, and we can see the big banks. There is a tendency that small banks are going to close in the next 2 to 3 4 5 years. I think that's going to concentrate on the hand of a few big players. I don't know, how do you see that, since I don't have the concrete answer for this question.
Yeah, that's where my mind would go as well. I mean, you'd have to centralize it to the big boys, and the peripherals would get knocked off. But there'd also be, and I don't have like a developmental background or have a really concrete understanding of all the technical sides with the code and how, for instance, I understand how staking and liquidity pools work, and how there can be commissions and transaction fees extrapolated from the new system when it's rolled out. So my mind's always gone more towards that, is that whilst it is seconds and cents, the volume that will then be dealt with would have to, in some way, because the volume would be way higher, and the pools of liquidity that you're extracting from stocks, bonds, real estate, derivatives, everything we've discussed, would allow you to compensate in some way. Because
that makes sense, because the volume would perhaps, I don't really know the concrete numbers, but I would
I don't
estimate
either.
at least a 10x. From what they handle currently, it would at least a 10x. So it makes sense that they would have to manage these sources of income, let's say through liquidity pools or fees that can be collected along the way. It's basically you have less fees, but you have more volume of data and information.
Yeah, that's where I perceive it. But I'd love to look at it more, because ultimately it's like, well, they're not going to allow their business model that's been rock solid for so long just die. So they have a plan, but I haven't gone too deep into it. So that's why I brought it
One
up.
thing you can be sure, the banks are not going anywhere. They're not going to.
Absolutely not. And where are we? Quick take on when we get this market structure bill, which is probably the bigger bill, to be honest, through. So we got stablecoin bill in the next, I think the Cardano founder came out the other day and said the next 60 to 90 days, hopefully the stablecoin will drop. When these two bills get through in the US later this year, we've seen so many dominoes fall the last 6 months. It's almost like a script playing out in real time. This has sort of always been my thing I'm most excited for, because I feel like that's one of the biggest dominoes. What do you see happening once those regulations drop in the US? And I know we've got the European Union dropping theirs and launching the CBDC in October, so that's a big thing too. But the US is obviously a big one. What do you see happening?
Well, we have seen every part of the playbook playing out. I think the first thing is that I think real stablecoin is going to play a major role. Is the stablecoin issued on top of the XRP ledger, so that's called LUSD. And I think that's going to cause a domino effect. You know Tether, USDT, so that's my first guess, is that USDT is slowly running out of business. So Tether is actually getting kicked out of Europe, for instance. By the way, today is the final deadline that Europeans have to convert all of their stablecoins, all of the remaining USDT to something that is MiCA compliant. So the future is digital assets that are regulated. And by that, I mean the ones that are in compliance with the government laws. So that's going to happen in Europe, it's going to happen in the US. So I think this is part of the plan. The first thing is going to happen is Tether. So I don't really have the answer if that's going to have some sort of black swan event where it goes down and plunges the entire crypto markets down, and then XRP comes out of the ashes. Or I don't know if that's going to be a gradual transition where the market cap of Tether is going to slowly fade away and is going to pass towards other stablecoins, the regulated ones. And we're talking about real stablecoin. And I think Circle is also going to be a big player. So right now they are in the process of approving on the Congress the stablecoin regulation. So that's aligned simultaneously with Ripple issuing its own stablecoin on top of the XRP ledger. So we can expect that the main stablecoin on the United States is probably going to be real stablecoin. We know that Tether has lied about the reserves, and that's not what happens with real stablecoin. So the CTFC has fined Tether in over $40 million. They lied about their USD reserves. So basically, essentially, Tether is not backed one-to-one to the US dollar, so it has not been fully audited. So I think that's where real stablecoin comes, and that's where the XRP ledger will start to shine, because we have this asset that is issued on top of the XRP ledger, and ultimately the US has to choose something that is American based. And right now Tether has just moved its headquarters towards El Salvador, And I think we are just witnessing the migration of the entire system right now. In October, CBDCs are going to be implemented in Europe. Christine Lagarde has already said that that's the final deadline to roll out CBDCs. And I just see that every single part of the playbook is playing out, and it's all connected to the XRP ledger.
Absolutely. And for the price junkies that follow me, I never talk about price, but in terms of that rollout plan, I've sort of alluded to the fact that we won't really see much appreciation until there's obviously broader macroeconomic considerations with the global liquidity and everything else. But when the regulations come, it's almost like they're planning for all those things to align for the back end of this year to be the next push. And we may even see some utility. So do your thoughts align on that front as well, or do you have a differing opinion in terms of when we see the next price appreciation?
Well, if I have to be honest, before the beginning of this year, I was projecting something more ahead. I was not expecting that I would come here and say that eventually this year XRP can hit $10, for example. I like to be realistic in price predictions, although down the road, I can see XRP to be among, let's say, $1,000 or $100. I think that's definitely possible. And for that to happen, we only need to capture a fraction, as we spoke before, let's say, of the derivatives market, for example. But I think in this moment, we are at an intersection of speculation and utility. If we look for the crypto markets right now, most cryptocurrencies didn't have a bull run. So if you go look at the charts, look of Ethereum's or most coins that are built on top of Ethereum, the so-called ERC20 ecosystem, all of these coins, including Bitcoin, they are sitting below bear market levels. And even Bitcoin, if we compare to what it was back in 2021, all-time high, $69,000, and we adjust inflation, it's very hard to say that Bitcoin had a bull run. We had 8,000, I think, was the all-time high this year. So the fact that the assets, and that was not a coincidence. If we start to think about the assets that were the best performing on this entire cycle, it's all about utility. It's the XRPs, it's the XLMs, it's the HBARs, VELOS, SHXs. Most of the coins that are involved on the XRP ecosystem, the ISO 20022 compliant companies that issued assets that are pivotal for the new financial system. And if we watch other ecosystems, like let's say, take the chart of Atom, for example. It's a real project. It has utility, it has users, but it doesn't have the right technology. And that's the main difference between some of the best performing tokens back in the bull run of 2021 and now. So I have raised some concerns about the volume on the crypto markets right now, and also I think it was some sort of problem reaction solution where they inflated the market. So there are too many coins in the crypto markets right now. You have hundreds of new coins issued on a daily basis. You had the president of the United States launching his own meme coin. You have Melania's coin, which essentially flooded the crypto market. So they have caused what I call the dilution of the markets. And basically, there has been no enough liquidity to pump all of these coins. So I think what we are seeing right now is a separation between utility assets and what we call the speculative assets. And ultimately, considering that the digital euro is coming on October, I think there is a very good chance that we're going to see price appreciation for the utility assets, specifically for XRP. I have drawn many connections between the digital euro and XRP. I totally believe that the digital euro is going to run on top of the XRP ledger, and I have evidences that we have European payment systems that are leveraging the technology of the XRP ledger and perhaps even XRP. So I think 2025 for me, it's a key year where there's going to be this separation of utility it's the so-called decouple.
Mm. So you still think we'll see the yachting party at the end of the year, the $10 yachting party?
I wish so. You are invited, by the way. Gonna put you on the guest list. I definitely believe it's possible, and for that to happen, I don't really think Bitcoin has to go to some wild numbers. I think perhaps if we go just back above $100,000, that's gonna give a lot of possibilities for digital assets like XRP to really break through the new all-time high. And once we break the new all-time high, XRP essentially enters price discovery. So there is no resistance levels, and it takes very little to be at $10. Honestly, it doesn't take that much volume. And
Mm.
I really think we're gonna overtake Ethereum by market cap. I give it 90 days until XRP becomes number two. We are witnessing right now the downfall of Ethereum, in my opinion.
Yeah. Two more quick questions and we'll wrap it up, Edo. Very appreciative of your time. Your take profit / long-term strategy. I've talked a lot about how I intend on keeping most of my holdings and then using them within staking liquidity pools or using it as collateral. And when the time's right and it feels safe, I'd like your quick take on that. I know the followers really wanted to know where your head's at with that process.
Yeah, that's an important question. I'll start to saying that everyone has different financial liabilities and everyone has a different situation. But I'll share my strategy, and based on my strategy, people can just adapt to their own reality. So, XRP, I don't touch my holdings, but because I have built a diversified portfolio and I work 24 hours in crypto, so I have my XRP holdings, which are basically sitting in cold wallets, and I have a 10% XRP bag, which I set apart. And that's the bag that I trade. That's the bag that I have on exchanges. So I can, for example, continuously trade because I really understand the pair, the XRP charts. If you trade a few charts, if you trade a few assets on a daily basis, you really understanding the fundamentals and what's gonna do next. So this I do on a daily basis. I just trade XRPs and I continuously increase my holdings by selling the top, buying the low. But again, I only do that with 10%. The 90% that is on my cold wallets is almost as if it doesn't exist. I don't check how much that's worth in dollars. I don't really care about the value of XRP right now. And my ultimate goal with XRP is I'm going to hold it. And there will come the time where we're going to be able to safely create passive income out of the XRP. So we're going to create income out of XRP dividends by lending it to the banks. So the banks are going to be desperate for liquidity. And if you own your own keys, so if you have sovereignty over your digital assets, you're going to be able to generate passive income in the future. And considering that these assets are expected to at least a 10x from current levels, at least to handle everything that we have spoke before, derivatives markets, tokenization of real world assets, cross-border payments, integrated into Swift. So I'm firmly convinced we're going to see price appreciation for XRP. And the fact that we have to have patience because otherwise, just imagine the people who bought, let's use Bitcoin as an example. If you bought BTC at $300 and you just sold for a 3x, you really have to ask yourself the question, was it really life changing? I don't think so. So you have to be prepared. That doesn't mean you can't take profits on the way, but if you build a consistent bag, that also gives you flexibility because now you have the privilege, in my case, for example, to have this 10% bag. Let's say when it hits $10, I'll take some profits from that 10% bag. Another thing, I have that 10% on exchanges. If tomorrow there is a collapse of the system and exchanges bankrupt, which already happened in the past in crypto, if FTX was an example. Another one was Cryptopia that I lost personally there, my Dogecoins. It was worth a lot of money. but I learned the lesson. So even if tomorrow I wake up and there is a collapse of the exchanges, I still have 90% of my holdings sitting in cold wallets and I am safe for the long term. And that's the bug that I'm not here on my phone watching XRP price and mentally doing mental gymnastics and thinking to figure it out how much is that worth in dollars. If that I understand that dollars and all fiat currencies are on the same boat and they are getting purposely devaluated by the government. So why should I be concerning myself by trying to understand how much is that worth in dollars or in euros? Meanwhile, I just have been focusing on increase my XRP holdings. That's what I have been consistently doing. As a coincidence, it has made a 5 or 10x in dollars since I have been accumulating this digital asset, but I'm not really paying attention to that. And since I have built a consistent bag, a diversified bag, that allowed me to take profits along the way in other digital assets. So I had a very large bag, for example, of Vilo, which I made a 4 or 5x, and I took profits from that, and that allowed me to reinvest these profits in other areas. That goes for real estate, that goes for precious metals. So I think it's very important to take profits along the way. I just think that you should have one bag for the long term, which is your forever bag, and I think you have a separated bag of your investments that you can take profits. And not in all digital assets you have to hold forever. Some of them I just trade and I just make profits and I just sell them and I don't buy them back.
Great answer and great insight. Thanks for that. And in closing, your favorite book or a couple of books?
My favorite books. If you give me 1 second, I'm gonna show here. I have them here. Okay?
Yeah.
That's a great question. Okay, I have them here. I read them every day. So first, I would argue that one of my favorite ones in the past that used to be Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. But then I think there was some missing elements. If you really think about most people who read who sorry, let me start again. I lost the line of thoughts, but okay. So one of my favorite books used to be Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. You know this one? Are you familiar with?
I'm not.
And then I went to study a bit more about it, and I even found out that Napoleon Hill himself retired poor. So he was not. He ended up not being successfully financially. And a lot of people, I think you can learn a lot from that book, but I don't think that book gives you all the insight. So this happens to be my favorite book, the one that really I can really say that, and I mean, not thanks to the book, but thanks to the knowledge inside the book, that I achieve financial freedom nowadays. This has been for me the game changer. It's called Ask Until It Is Given. And that's by Matteo David Hurtado, which he ended up being my mentor. And I had him on the show with me and Versan. If you watch our show, maybe you have watched the podcast we did with Matteo. He's also an XRP holder. So
I've watched. When did you do this? Because I watch it most weeks. How long ago?
I think about 2 months ago, something like that. It was me, Matteo, David, and Versan. And also this one is by Matteo. It's called Trust. He's a ministry and it's about God's teachings, and he just put him. So he tells all his story on how he went from being bedridden to a multimillionaire. And I can promise you that most of my financial knowledge and most of what I have achieved was thanks to the knowledge I got on his book, and I definitely recommend that. He also has a YouTube channel, by the way. He's a nice guy.
Beautiful. I'm going to check out the episode. I've probably seen it and I just can't remember the name to the face, but I'll definitely watch it.
Yeah, I can send you the link later.
Yeah, beautiful. Edo, it's been terrific. I'm conscious of time. We've taken up an hour of your time. It's been awesome. I think we covered all the ground we needed to. There's awesome stuff in there. I'm going to snip these up into little clips as well for my page. We'll do some longer snippets on YouTube and then the full show, of course. So thanks so much for your time, mate. And
Amazing,
I really look
amazing.
forward to
And
chatting
just
in the
to
future.
let your audience know, I don't know if they watch our show, but we're gonna have you as a guest. So I invite them to watch our show. Nathan hopefully is gonna accept the invitation.
Yes,
so.
and I'm very excited to come on. I've watched it for a long time. And you've probably seen, I put you guys up a lot on my stories and send them there when you put out episodes that I listen to.
Yeah,
so.
I'm sure Versan and Vandal and David, they're gonna love to have you as a guest. So we're gonna let the audience know once we have the date so they can watch live